Hi, welcome back to my channel. In today's lesson, we'll be teaching you how to pass a callback as props. We've already seen how to pass state from parents to the child. And this way, you'll be also learning how to do interactions between the parents and the child. So basically what happens is after you pass different methods or callbacks to a child component, you can always access it within the child component by using this .props. Yeah. So here in this example, you have a myApp component, which is a parent, and it will be rendering two child components, which is getInput and renderInput. So you need to add the getInput component to the render method in the myApp parent component, and then you need to pass it a property called input with and assign a value to it based on the state of the parent. After that, you need to add the renderInput component inside the render method of the parent and also assign it a value based on the state. So we will see how that is done. So here, if you see the code, you have myApp, which is a parent. It has an initial state for the input value as empty, and the handleChange for this has already been bound here, and the value will be this .state.target value, which is the current value of the state. Now here you have both the child components getInput and renderInput with its respective codes, where in each of these child components they are accessing the value by using value of the input by using this .props.input, and for handleChange this .props.handleChange. Yeah, so by using this .props and the property name, you can access that particular prop inside your child component. But before that, we need to introduce the child components inside the render method of the parent component, and that is missing here. So we need to do that, and also we need to introduce the properties themselves with its values, or rather the callbacks as properties with its values inside the render method of myApp within the mentioned child components. Because unless you do that, how can you know that these are the properties inside and these are the child components for the parent? Once you introduce the child components and the properties inside the parent component, then within the respective child components, individual child components, they can interact with the parents through the properties using this .props. So let's get into action. Here within the render method of the parent, we are introducing the name of the child component, which is the first one as required is getInput child component. Then after that, you are supposed to introduce the next name of the child component, which is the renderInput. Basically, getInput and renderInput are the callbacks which you are requiring respectively. getInput to get the input in real time from the user, and renderInput to show or display the value of the input in based on the current state. Yeah, and so let's introduce the property here. Okay, so inside the getInput child component, I need to mention the property of input. Okay, so input equals this .state.input value, right? Because the input value is already the input value state is already mentioned inside the parent. So based on that, I need to put a state here, right? So that it can be accessed later in the individual child component. So getInput and then introduce the value of the property input. Okay, so my keyboard's got stuck, sorry about that. Input, you can get it to the next line so that you don't make a mistake and it's clear enough. So input equals, and then do not forget the open and close curly brackets, JSX. Input equals this .state dot input value, because here we have already this dot state input value as empty as the initial value of the state, as the initial value of the input. So based on that, this dot state dot input value within the curly brackets open and close. So here I've already introduced the property of input and how and what is its state value currently, this dot state dot input value. So how it changes will be based on the state of the input value. So that is what it means. Next, I need to introduce one more property here, which is the handleChange. Yeah. So why I need the handleChange property or the handleChange prop? Why? Because the handleChange property will actually handle the changes that is happening inside the input. That is, will actually handle the changes happening to the input, which is being fed by the user in different current states, in different states, or rather it will actually handle the input which is happening in current time. Yeah, in current state or current time. So this dot, by using this dot handleChange, it will actually grab and handle the input. It will help to handle the change which is happening to the input based on different current values. So that's the idea of introducing the handleChange property here. Okay, and then later inside the getInput child component, we will use this dot props dot input for the input, and for the handleChange, this dot props dot handleChange. So that's the idea. You can only do that inside the individual respective child components by accessing it by using this dot props with the property name, after introducing the property here inside the child component within the main parent component render method. So keep that in mind. Once you remember this method, you can keep repeating it for all your future exercises. So render input, the other child component mentioned here or introduced here, then introduce the property which is the input. So again it will be the same, this dot state dot input value. Why? Because whatever the getInput child component is grabbing the input based on current state, that particular current state input has to be rendered or displayed, right? Has to be shown. So that's a function of the renderInput child. So that's a connection. Now here you will find we don't need the handleChange inside the handleChange method or the handleChange property inside the renderInput child component. Why? Because it's only getInput which is already handling the changes. The renderInput will just kind of display whatever the latest changed value of the input according to current state. That's it. It need not bother about the handleChange, or rather it need not bother about the changes that is happening with the input that is being fed by the user. Its property is only just receiving the latest input based on the current time and show it or display it. And then as you can see, yeah, I just finished that. This dot state dot input value. This dot state dot input value. Sorry about the typo mistake, and the keyboard is a bit tricky here, fluctuating. So that's why I'm sorry about that. So you can be more careful in your while you're typing it. Yeah. Okay. So this dot state dot input value. So the input will be the same. Okay. So as I mentioned, handleChange property not required for this child enter input, because it's already been handled by the input getInput component. Okay. This and the duty of the renderInput is finished here by just displaying the latest input values. Okay. So now we've done this introduction of the child components with its respective properties and how to access it methods here. And then once you go into the individual child components, there you can access these properties introduced here by using this.props dot whatever be the property name. So that's how it is done. Okay. So this is how the interaction between the parents and the child happens. So here getInput just feed some value to test it out. edtech by Meera, that's the name of my channel. So I just check it out using my channel name. Okay, and see, immediately it is grabbed and displayed by the input render on the UI. So the getInput is grabbing the input in current time, input render is displaying it as per current time, the whatever input is being, and then I can do it like millions of times, it will happen the same way. So now you see how we introduce the property inside the myApp, and or rather we introduce the child name also, don't forget that, with the property inside the myApp parent component. And then when we go inside the individual child components, I use the input to how I access the property by using this.props.input and this.props.handleChange for the getInput, and for renderInput it's only this.props.input because handleChange is not happening there. So as simple as that. And then see you in the next lesson. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the subscribe button for more such free lessons.